Has it ever happened to you that you get to looking at yourself in the mirror at the end of a day and you have this unidentified stain right on your shirt? And you're like, well, where did that come from? Is that like a coffee stain? Is that from the chocolate ice cream cone? Is that from when I was hugging a bunch of pine cones earlier? I don't know where it came from. It's important to figure out what kind of stain it is, right? Because Google will tell you this. You got to know what kind of stain it is in order to clean it off. Brief story. I think I can share this. I hope. Way back when I was little, I went to the zoo once. And I was walking around outside at the zoo, the Omaha Henry Doorly Zoo. Highly recommended if you ever visit Omaha, Nebraska. Nice place. Omaha Henry Doorly Zoo. I'm looking around at the zoo. And all of a sudden, I look over at my shirt, and it's got a big old stain right here. Kind of brown. Now, I had had ice cream earlier that day, and in spite of the fact that it might have been a little bit strange for ice cream to make its way to the top of your shoulder, I said to myself, well, that's probably ice cream. Therefore, I should probably lick it off. It wasn't ice cream. It's important to understand what the stain is, right? It helps you to understand how to deal with the stain today. We're talking about messiness in our lives, the messiness of sin. As we talk about the messiness of sin, we got to understand where does it come from. It helps us to understand how God helps us deal with it. Make sense? Before we do that, let's say a prayer, ask God to bless us. Oh, Lord, strengthen us this morning by the truth. Your word is the truth. Open our eyes to see what you want us to see. Open our ears to hear what you want us to hear. And open our hearts to believe what you would have us believe. Amen. It's Mark chapter 7 is where we're going to start our sermon today. We're going to pick up a couple other scriptures as well. You've got them all listed for you in your worship folder if you want to follow along there and take notes. Otherwise, wherever you want to take notes is fine with me. Mark chapter 7 says this, the Pharisees, those teachers, those religious leaders, the teachers of the law, and they had come from Jerusalem. They gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples were eating food with hands that were defiled. That is, their hands were unwashed. And so the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands? A couple notes to help us understand what's going on here. First of all, they're eating together, and that's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? Jesus, he's divine God, right? God eternal. He's been around since before eternity as God himself, and yet he needs to get himself some calories to keep going while he's on earth. Like, interesting, right? And back at that time, in the middle of Jerusalem, there's kind of like this commons area where people could get together and eat, spend time after they're in the synagogue studying scripture. They had time eating together. And so that's where they are. I kind of picture it like a food court. If you want to take that all the way, then you picture Andrew, the disciple, getting up and he gets some food from the local burger joint, and maybe Simon Peter, he gets up and he gets some food from the local chicken joint, and someone goes and gets some Chinese food. And I like to picture that John, he's kind of like me, and he's walking around and he's getting a bunch of little samples of 15 different kinds of chicken on a little toothpick. They get together in this area, they're eating food, and because it's a public area, what they have, something kind of like this. Big old wash basin. Why? Well, in part to wash your hands to get rid of the germs. But a bigger part of the reason for this is ceremonial washings. What does that mean? Well, in the Old Testament, so that first whole section of the Bible, God really wanted to impress upon his people, sin bad, holiness good. And so what he had them do, visually speaking, is whenever they would approach God, they'd have a ceremonial washing. The ceremonial washing would remind them, I, as a sinner, I have a heart and a mind that's done wrong things. I need to be cleaned by God in order to reach God. Now, the Pharisees had taken that to the nth degree, and they began to wash all day long. All kinds of ceremonial washings, and usually the Pharisees' version of ceremonial washings is not privately, I am a sinner, oh God, help me. It's kind of like this. It's like, look at me, and I'm doing the correct ceremonial washing. 15 scrubs to the left, 15 scrubs to the right. Got it up underneath the elbows, between the fingers, and a couple of drips like that. And now the next Pharisee can go. This big old ceremonial washing to kind of be like, look at us. The concept was simply this, that if they didn't remember to do that, that was what would cause them to be defiled. So picture that. If they don't remember to wash their hands and they ate, they would bring guilt and sin into their heart. Now, the rub is this: when Jesus is eating with his disciples, and Jesus is supposed to be a good teacher of the law, right? He's supposed to know his Bible. Your guys aren't washing their hands. They're not doing the ceremonial washing. Like, how are you supposed to be a teacher of the law and you're not even doing this one thing? Jesus, you're letting your disciples defile themselves by the things that they eat. Jesus, you're letting your disciples bring sin through their mouth, into their gut, into their heart. Stop for a minute with me, because understand, here's what the Pharisees thought, and it's faulty, it's not correct. Their thought was that sin was something that originated from exterior sources, right? Literally, their concept was, if you didn't remember to wash your hands, sin, it's kind of like a germ, sin, it's kind of like a virus, and it will go inside of you, and that's how you would become sinful. Now, I say that for you guys here today because I don't think that there's anyone who came today and said, I got to remember to wash my hands with Dial soap 15 times. I can't go to church with any kind of germs on my hand, otherwise I'll bring sin into the church. I don't want to do that. No, we don't think like that. Yet I would imagine that with the temptations that are in your life and the sin that you're like, I really wish I didn't do that anymore, whatever it might be, you start to develop a game plan for how to deal with it. And what can happen is sometimes we kind of put all the blame on exterior sources. Something that we might say, it certainly influences us to sin. But today, Jesus in his word says, yeah, that's an influence, and maybe you back away from that influence, but that's not the origin of sin. A few examples. First one is very similar, right? Sin doesn't originate in food and drink. Like, think about that. You've never taken some kind of a nutrition label and you read it and you're like, high fructose corn syrup, vitamin C, and sin. Okay, good. There's some sin in this food right here. Right, that food's neutral, right? That being said, it can certainly be an influence that leads you to sin. Easiest case in point, like addictive drugs, alcohol, right? Absolutely. Food maybe even too, right? If you just ate, imagine this is like my meal. I'm having a supper and I'm getting the big old monster burger from Hardee's, maybe 3 of them. Plus I've got a couple of packages of fries, and then I down a bag of Doritos with one of those 64-ounce Baja Blast Mountain Dews from Taco Bell. I might feel gross afterwards, right? And if you feel gross, what? You might act gross to others, right? It could influence you. And so it is totally fair and totally good to say, you know what? I'm going to get away from the things that influence me to sin. Just don't come to the conclusion that the Pharisees did that says, well, as long as I'm all healthy, as long as I eat all organic food, as long as I work out 7 times a week, as long as I put essential oils right on my head whenever I feel scared, well, then I'll never have a problem with sin. Is that actually true? What do you think? A couple shaking their heads, no. Like, here's how I picture it, right? I might stop eating all that gross food, which means suddenly I'm no longer saying to people, get away from me because I don't feel good. Suddenly I'm saying to people, I feel pretty awesome because I am pretty awesome because I've been eating healthy, right? It's just a different kind of sin. Or maybe I say to you, I'm going to stop sitting here on the couch and lusting over the people on the TV. I'm going to head to the gym and lust over the people in real life. Or maybe you say, you know what? I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to stop being so worrisome, just kind of relax here with some healthy food, with some of those special oils, and I feel so much better because of the healthy things I do. Thank you, healthy things that I do. Is there anyone else I need to thank? No. Like, do you see it? Stay away from things that are influencing you to sin. Don't understand me, food and drink-wise. But it's not the origin, all right? It's not the origin of sin. Sin doesn't originate from food and drink. Number 2, it doesn't originate from the media. Now, pause for a minute here, because there are certainly things in the media, and by media, I just mean like TV, movies, YouTube videos, whatever's on social media. Certainly, there are plenty of things that we could watch, and they could influence us poorly, right? They could lead us down a wrong path. There was a 3-year-old the other day who started to name drop some of the characters from Game of Thrones. I said, well, I don't know if that's probably the best for a 3-year-old to know that, right? I mean, it influences us in a wrong way. Certainly true. That being said, we don't want to go so far as to think, well, as long as I avoid all media, I'll never have a problem with sin, right? As long as I watch PureFlix and only PureFlix. You guys know what PureFlix is? PureFlix is like the Netflix version that's only all G-rated shows all the time. Because I'm a pastor, I get ads for it. I like to have all the commercials memorized. It pops up all the time. So PureFlix, or maybe you say, you know what, as long as we watch just VeggieTales. You guys know VeggieTales? VeggieTales all the time, all the time, all the time. Cucumbers are nice. Watch VeggieTales. I'll never struggle with sin. Well, not necessarily true. Oh, you want some proof? I don't know, probably tens of thousands of years of human history before any of that stuff even existed. No YouTube, still sin. No Twitter, still sin. No Facebook, still sin. It's not the origin, okay? Got it? One more. Sin doesn't originate, there it is, from stress. Like stress is, who loves stress? No one raises their, I love stress. No. Stress can physically cause you to not feel good. It can influence your actions so that you are sinful towards others, right? It leads you to be rude, leads you to be wrong, right? It leads you to hurt others, to harm others. Absolutely. And so you might say to yourself, well, as long as I de-stress completely and I get rid of everything that causes me stress, I'll never deal with sin. I'll never have a problem with it. Quick story, a couple of months ago, my wife and I went to the beach to de-stress. We're at the beach and my fingers, not my fingers, my what do you call toes? That's what they're called. My toes are in the sand and I'm de-stressing and I'm not being as rude. Sometimes, you know, stress of being at work, right? That can cause that even for a pastor. And Juliana says to me, hey, let's go for a run. Oh, no, it'll be good. It'll be a good time for us to bond. This is a great opportunity for you and I to be together. I don't want to do anything. Like, okay, great. You're not dealing with stress and having this sinful anger, but instead you're dealing with non-stress and there's this sinful laziness, right? It's true. Stress is not the source. It may cause and influence some sin, but it's not the source of sin. All right, what is the source, my friends? Take a look at what Jesus says in response to the Pharisees. It's kind of unexpected, and it flips all religious thought on its head. Jesus said this, don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach and out of the body. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that all evil thoughts come. Thoughts like sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these evils come from inside, and they make a person unclean. In the face of people, myself included, who generally like to consider themselves good, this teaches a really harsh lesson. Like, before you can punch someone in the face, you have to first think, I want to punch them in the face. Before you can commit adultery, you have to first think, I want to commit adultery. Before you could spew hateful language, you have to think, I want to spew this hateful language. Before you can be a jerk, you have to think, you know what would be fun right now, being a jerk. Any sinful action originates within. Here's Jesus' flip, right? Jesus' flip is this. Sin originates from interior sources, from the inside. Like ultimately, if we wanted to deal with sin completely, that's where we've got to go. Interior sources, and here's where it starts, right? Within your heart. Jesus said this, he said, flesh gives birth to flesh. Sinful hearts give birth to sinful hearts. We live in the triangle, by the way, a lot of medicine here in the triangle. If you had something that was wrong with your body, you could have all kinds of tests done to figure out what it was. Get an X-ray, an MRI, you get a CAT scan. You can drink the ecto-cooler-like liquid, and you drink it, and then it scans your body. And if you happen to be glowing, right, it tells you where the problems are. Picture the Bible here kind of like a spiritual X-ray, a spiritual MRI, a spiritual CAT scan. God says this, you want to know where the problem is? You might not like it. You want to know where the problem is? You probably won't like it at all. You want to know where the problem is really for you, for all of you, for all of you, for all of you, for you too, Pastor, for all of you. It's your heart. It's so easy to want to look outside, right? You're right, Pastor. Actually, tell all those people that the problem is their hearts. Me? God says that's where it starts. And you might say, well, I didn't put sin in my heart. Who put it there? Well, since sin comes from the hearts of humans, I know a human that was close to you that may be responsible for this. Sin originates from your parents' hearts. Again, the Bible says flesh gives birth to flesh. Here's what Jesus means. He means alligators give birth to baby alligators. Cats give birth to kitties. Dogs give birth to puppies. Sinful humans give birth to sinful humans. You get a lot of things from your parents. You might get your eyes from your mom. Maybe you get your ears from your dad. Maybe you get facial features from your parents. I get my receding hairline from my dad. Thanks a lot. Whatever it might be. Another thing you get from your parents, sin. Like we are sinners because we sin, but we also sin, get this, because we're sinners. Oh man, mom and dad, thanks a lot. Well, don't get mad at them entirely because they got it from their parents. Oh man, grandma and grandpa, thanks a lot. Well, don't get mad at them because they got it from. Oh man, grandma and grandpa, like keep going back, keep going back, keep going back, keep going back. Sin's been passed down for a long time. If you go back far enough, you get to the origin, though, I suppose. We talked about him earlier, this guy named Adam. Adam, by the way, literally is a Hebrew word that means the man. Like, good name for the first man, right? Good work. The man. Here's what happened. Adam and his wife Eve, Adam and Eve, who are the first two humans in history, they're also two of only three people in the history of the world who have entered the world without a sinful heart. True fact. They are 66% of people in history who have entered the world without a sinful heart. Here's what God does. He creates the world. He creates the world perfectly. He creates them perfectly. He creates them without sin. And in God's perfect world perception, which God's view is perfect, he says, in a perfect world, Adam and Eve, I give you this beautiful garden. I give you beautiful trees. I give you delicious fruit. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put one tree. This is the only plant I've got up here. So this one right here. Like, I don't want you to be a robot and just follow me blindly. So here's one way to show that you appreciate this, one way so you can experience love, because love freely given, is a part of a free, wonderful, perfect world. All you got to do, don't eat that one fruit. There's plenty of other fruit, don't eat that one fruit. There's plenty of other trees, don't eat from that one tree. Plenty of other things to do, don't do that one thing. And what do? That one thing. Like in their mind, they're like, well, this will be a delicious fruit. In reality, what takes place? They immediately plunge humanity into sinfulness. Like, think about your life. Everything that's going wrong, and that's been a struggle, the challenging relationships, the challenges at work, whatever it might be, it ultimately finds its root right there with that bite. Like, even if you read the story, you know what happens like right afterwards? Suddenly, Adam and Eve, who have been perfect companions, imagine like perfect marriage, immediately they run off into different corners and they get different sets of clothing to wear because I don't want him to look at me like that. And you trying to make fun of me, or this isn't a six-pack, I'm sorry. Right afterwards, they hear God coming for the first time ever. They hide. Why are you guys hiding from the one who loved you and created you? Did you eat from the fruit you're not supposed to? And for the first time ever, her fault, his fault, that snake's fault. Like, sin's there, and it's there to stay. Sin finds its origins from way back at the beginning, my friends. Sin is a result of humans. Now, let me pause right there. I'm going to address a concern that maybe some of you, probably some of you, are having right now. Because what can happen when you kind of go back that far in the story and you're thinking deeply and you're thinking rationally is you may say to yourself, well, but that's not it. Like the origin might be Adam, but didn't Adam eat because the tree was even there? And wasn't there some kind of a snake, like the devil? Wasn't the devil talking? Isn't it his fault? And actually, God's responsible for all of this. Isn't this really God's fault? The story we are referencing comes in Genesis 3. There's 2 chapters of the Bible before it. Chapter 1 talks all about how God creates the entire world. And at the end of his creation, God says this. God saw all that he had made, and he said that it was very good. Notice it does not say God saw all that he had made, and he said that it was meh. God saw all that he has made, and he said that it was, it's not bad. God saw all that he's made, and he's like, well, it's pretty good, but there are a couple minor discrepancies, but hopefully you'll forgive me, because this is the first time anyone's ever undertaken creating a universe anyways. Give me some slack. No, he calls it very, very good. Here's what that means. God in his perfection, in his love, he creates a world where people are free to express love. It's not like creating Siri or Google Maps, which you can tell them what to do and they'll do it for you most of the time. That's a robot. That's not love. God creates the world and he says to the angels, angels, follow me. You're free to do so. And one of them, named Satan, chooses not to. God creates a world and he creates this tree as an altar that you are free to worship at. People choose not to. God creates Adam and Eve and he creates them as people free to serve and love him. And they choose to bring sin into their heart. On the one hand, maybe this is bad news because now we don't have anyone else to blame. It's not God's fault at all, right? The one person that sin does not originate from is not God himself. But on the other hand, this right here is amazing news, and here's why. God's not been infected by sin. God doesn't have evil on his heart. There's nothing bad about your God who's taking care of you. He's perfect. He is good. He is holy. Like, if we're talking about sin and it originates from a time way back at the beginning, it means the one who solves sin is going to be the one who was around before the beginning ever began. That's what he does. Do you see this in your worship folders there? There's a section there from Romans. And in Romans, it says, thank you. Yeah. It says this. Just as one trespass resulted in condemnation, Adam's trespass, it brought condemnation, sin for all people. So also one righteous act, God's act, resulted in justification. That is a declaration of innocence and life for all people. For justice through the disobedience of the one man, many are made sinners. So also through the obedience of the one man, many will be made righteous. Here's the point we're getting at right here. Right? God is not the one who originates sin. God is the one who exterminates it. He's the one who destroys it. And how did he do it? Well, you kind of get into the heart of it in that sections from Romans chapter 5. First thing first, God exterminates sin through Jesus' perfect life. I said earlier, there are 3 people in history who have entered this world without sin in their heart. Adam and Eve, who then chose to bring sin into their hearts. Who's the third person? Jesus. That's the whole virgin birth thing, God's own son, right? From holy God to God himself. Jesus enters this world without sin on his heart, and he has the opportunity to choose evil, and every time he does, he says, away from me, Satan. Every time. Temptations to greed, temptations to lust, temptations to abuse, temptations to tell the Pharisees to buzz off. God keeps his heart pure. And that's key because that leads to the second part right here. God exterminates sin through Jesus' innocent death. Do you remember when we were talking about that stain on your shirt? If you get a stain on your shirt, maybe fresh ketchup right on your shirt, what do you got to do? So you get a nice rag or you get a sponge or whatever, and you got to blot first, right? Don't spread it out. You blot, and you just kind of rub until it's gone. And then it's gone right here, but have you ever looked at the rag after you do that? Or you look at the sponge afterwards, what's it look like? Well, the stain's all over the sponge. The stain is all over the rag. It's transferred. That's Jesus. No matter what your sin has been, no matter what your stain has been, no matter how big, no matter how deep, no matter how bright, no matter how intense it's stained, even it stained you and your guilt and your shame, Jesus comes along and he blots it all up. Because the wages of sin is death. What's Jesus do? He dies. Why? He's perfect. We heard that earlier. Why does he die? Because he's taken all of your sins with him to that cross. And then he dies. You know what dies with him? That's sin. This is like 2,000 years after Jesus. How's that possible? He's God. He takes all that sin to that cross, buries it in the grave, kind of like how when you get done with that rag and you toss it into the garbage and you close the lid, they toss his body into the grave and they close it up. But 3 days later, what'd those kids say? 3 days later, he came back to life. He came back to life. You know it's not a part of the Easter story? And on the third day, greed rose again. No. And on the third day, sin walked up. No. In God's sight, sin stays dead. He exterminates your sin. He exterminates your shame. Here's just simply right here. Here, you've heard it before. Hear it again. You are forgiven. Here's the what now. Look at James chapter 1, 19 to 21, last section of Scripture. It says this. Take note of this. Here's the what now. Everyone then should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Get rid of all moral filth and the evil that's so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Anger is an emotion, right? Emotions are simply emotions. They happen. Anger is not necessarily a sin. God gets angry at sin. Here's the problem, though, with humans, right? Human anger is always going to come from a heart that is sinful. Like even in the most righteous version, there's going to be like this sin-taintedness that can be there. That's why, number one, right? God says this. It says, be slow to be angry. Be slow to speak when you're angry. Or any emotion that you're feeling, right? It's an emotion that's tainted by sin, emotions of happiness, of sadness, of anger, and they all qualify. Take a moment and pause, okay? Because what can happen when you're in an emotional state? Does this happen to you? You get in an emotional state and you just speak and you just do. You assume it must be the right thing because that's how I felt. Oh, I'm feeling angry. I should probably be really rude and tell my husband always and never. Tell my wife to get out of here. Right? That'll be nice. No. Pause. Don't listen to that sinful heart. Instead, listen to the word that's been planted. I like that word. Planted. Planting the message of heart, Jesus in the hearts of North Raleigh. Planted in the heart of you. Because if we talk about human hearts up to this point, you might say, well, they're kind of sin-filled. How could a sinful person ever do anything good ever? And God says, here's how. I am planting my gospel message in your heart. I am planting the love of Jesus in your heart. I am planting forgiveness. I am planting my power. I am planting my strength in your heart. Reminds me kind of a garbage heap. Everybody stop and think of a garbage heap real quick. You got your picture? It's probably not nice looking, I would imagine. Kind of stinky, kind of smelly, kind of garbagey. Garbage heaps are garbagey. Good adjective. And you might say that's all that it's going to be. It's just going to be garbage always. But you understand, here's what God does. In the sinful mess, that garbage heap of sin that is the human heart, God causes his gospel to grow. It's beautiful. Like even more beautiful, like cleaning up the mess, nourishing, planting. That's what you guys are blooming already, right? He puts it in his heart to bloom and to grow and to show love toward one another. He empowers us. He uplifts us. He gives us strength. He encourages us. As we hear his word, we listen to his word, not to our sinful, selfish hearts. We listen to his selfless, powerful, pure word. We bloom. Friends, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, sin originates from within. Therefore, our salvation comes from without. And after our salvation has come from without, God places that message within, and from within, that love goes without. Friends, may God uplift your hearts in the message of his love and grace now and always. Amen.